I want to talk about this Horsey comic that was in the Seattle Sunday Times. Uh, it seems left or right, we cannot get away from this weird founding fathers revisionist history. Because this guy and this guy, not that different. So let's get into all of the history that they don't like to talk about. And clearly Horsey doesn't know, or he might not have printed this crap. So let's get into it, shall we? This is John Adams. John Adams here lecturing Donald Trump. He has used his high office to vastly increase his own wealth. He has turned the officials of the government into enforcers of his revenge. He has falsely pledged to uplift the common man, but has taxed them with tariffs while coddling the wealthy few. He has sent his officers to imprison people without trial, invade private homes, and abuse citizens to the point of homicide. All true. All true. Yeah, so John Adams himself is pretty famous, actually, and it's one of the reasons he didn't get reelected, for writing the Anti-Sedition Act of 1798. Yeah, it's like 6-7 years after the First Amendment is already on parchment. This dude thinks it's a good idea to make sure that nobody can speak out against the government. Yeah, you cannot write anything or utter anything negative against the government, or you would be locked up. And why did he do this? He did this because of all of the French and Irishmen that were coming over from countries that were in the middle of revolutions. And before you're like, wait a minute, America is all about revolution. Why would that scare him? What a great question. It scared him because our founding fathers, i.e. the colonial elites of their time, right, had been working very hard now to suppress the poor since the war. Before the war, in the 1750s, we had a bunch, 1760s, I mean, they actually lasted all through the war. Leading up through there, we had a bunch of income inequality riots. I mean, just for decades in this country, it was pure chaos. And why? Because the 3%, our founding fathers, had their hand in everybody's pocket way too deep, all right? And the Revolutionary War was just about the fact that the elite were then mad that the British had their hand in their pocket and they wanted to keep everything for themselves. That's what the Revolutionary War was about. It wasn't about all of our freedom. It was about the elite's financial freedom from Britain. All right? So there was all of these riots that were happening, and it is bore out in all of our founding fathers' memoirs and letters that they had to work very hard to turn the sentiment of the average colonist against the British, because they said, hey, it's all the British's fault that this income inequality exists. It's all their fault. If you fight them off, things will be better. We promise. So the middle class bought into this and were gung-ho. And our founding fathers were actually like, hey, if you're not illegally allowed to own a gun, we don't want you in the army. Well, they quickly saw the folly of this. There wasn't enough cannon fodder. So they invited the poorest of the poor, majority of your ancestors, the poorest of the poor, to fight in the army. Except for the poor knew that it didn't matter who won, because it was either way, it was going to be an elite working them to death. So they didn't want to fight. So the Revolutionary War is actually the very first example of our American armies paying the sons of the poor to come fight in the war for the elites with the promise of a better life. And we've been doing that ever since. I would know. I was an army mom. So the poor agree to fight in the Revolutionary War, and it is the poor, not them, as Horsey alleges, that gave us the country. The poor fought and died in the mud to win this country from the British. And then afterwards, our government said, we aren't going to pay you. Yeah, so coming into all of this that he's lecturing Trump about, our founding fathers turned around and told all of the war widows and all of the men who had survived the war, and I mean, I guess not all, but most, that they weren't going to pay them. And they gave various excuses. Either, no, sorry, you were actually a loyalist. Sorry, you can't prove your wartime service. All the way up to, sorry, we just don't have the money to pay you guys. Except for, much like today, how we can look around and see the income inequality with our own eyes, your ancestors could also look around and see the income inequality with their own eyes, and thus began more rioting and more rebellions. And if you get into places like Massachusetts, where Samuel Adams was stationed, yeah, the granddaddy protester, tea thrower himself, guess what he did after the British are finally removed and he is now firmly seated in power? He suspends habeas corpus against protesters and is very vocal about the fact that protesters, any man who protests laws against this republic, deserves execution. And they did kill people. Yeah, they in fact executed people. Founding fathers, Samuel Adams, had people executed for protesting the government. And again, protesting because our founding fathers kept the wealth for themselves. So I could go on and on and on, but this video is already at like 5